Hey everybody, Mike here with Delta Faucet. Today I'm going to show you how to install the Delta Faucet R3500-WL, a two-handle wall mount rough for a tub filler or for a bathroom faucet. Now typically you'd only be tackling this project if you're doing a bathroom remodel which has been taken all the way down to studs, or you're doing new construction. Now if you're tackling that complicated of a project, I'm guessing you have some DIY experience. Just keep in mind that every install is unique and building codes are different everywhere. So if you run into an issue or there are any steps that you're not totally comfortable with, I definitely recommend bringing in the help of a professional. Let's get started and talk about what tools you're going to need. Okay, so grab those tools and let's get started. So here we are in our rough opening. Now the first thing we need to do is to determine where we're going to install the valve body. Now there's really no rule exactly about where this needs to be placed, but there's certainly some considerations you want to think through to make sure it's going to function perfectly once everything comes together. Now the first is we want to make sure we're installing it in a position that's actually going to be above the tub deck so water flows into your tub. Now here I don't have my tub installed yet. What I've done is made a reference line on my two studs here where the top of the tub is going to be. Now again, remember this is off of finished floor, so I've thought through about what materials are going to be added to my subfloor, how high my tub is, and then made a quick pencil line just so I kind of have a reference mark about where that's going to sit. Secondly, I need to determine exactly on the wall where I want it mounted. Now again, there's no rule for this, but I want to make sure that first and foremost it's going to be high enough that once it's mounted, the water's actually going to flow into the tub. Secondly, I'm going to consider any other design features on the wall. Is there something that needs to be centered on? Do I want to make sure it's centered on the tub? Just to determine my left to right position. And then finally, I also want to remember that there's going to be trim added to the two valves on each side and then the spout in the middle. And that could have a little bit of additional depth, so I want to make sure I'm again mounting it high enough that it's going to sit over the top of the tub deck and fill correctly. All right, now for me, I'm going to be roughly about, call it about 4 to 6 inches above this reference line and somewhere in this stud bay here, so I know where that's going to go. Now, once I've determined that rough position, I'm going to determine how far back I need to add some additional blocking so I can screw my valve body to the blocking to hold everything nice and tight and in place. Now the important measurement here is 2 3/4 inches off finished wall. Now I'm going to say finished wall again because you have to think about what additional materials are going to be added to your framing to get to that finished wall depth. Now yours could be different at home, but for me, I'm going to be adding 1/2 inch of cement board and then roughly another 1/2 inch of tile and thin set. So my finished wall depth is going to be 1 inch out from my rough framing here. So I'm going to use my tape measure, and I know my blocking needs to be installed 1 3/4 inches back from the front of this framing. I'm going to take my tape measure, just line it up to make sure I've made my little reference line here 1 3/4 inches back from my finished framing, or my rough framing rather. And then repeat the same step on the other side. 1 3/4 inches. All right. Now that I've determined the rough position of my valve body and I know how far back I need that blocking to be, I'm going to go ahead and cut that blocking to be exactly between these two stud bays, and then we'll come back here and screw it into place. So I've got my piece of wood cut here, and I'm going to be screwing it in with 2 screws from each side, fit directly between those two studs. So what I want to do is I'm checking my reference mark back 1 3/4 inches from the front here. I'm going to screw in my first side. I want to make sure it's plumb. Just a good double check. Screw my second screw on this side now. All right, now before I screw my second side, I want to make sure that I'm keeping everything nice and level side to side as much as possible. So right around there looks perfect. And again, I'm going to check my reference line to make sure I've kept it back the correct distance from the front of my framing. Right down at the bottom there. And then set my last 2 screws. So now we get to attach our valve body to our blocking. Now for my installation, I'm going to be installing it with the word up facing the ceiling. And I've marked myself a quick center line here so I know exactly where I want this positioned when I put it in place. You'll also notice that I have the hot on the left, the cold on the right, and the supplies coming up from the floor. Now this is the default orientation that comes from the factory. However, say you're installing this over a concrete slab or you just don't have very good access down below, you can flip this whole unit over and then have the supplies come down from the ceiling if that's a little bit easier. Now if you install it this way, just remember that you're going to have to reverse your hot and your cold cartridges to ensure proper function when you put on your finished trim. Okay, so for me, Again, I'm installing it with the word up towards the ceiling. I'm going to hold that right in the middle, then grab my little level, and make sure that I'm installing this valve body level left to right, because that's very important. I want to make sure my handles and my spout line up perfectly when I put them on at the finished stage. All right, everything looks good and level and feels nice and secure on my blocking. So now I can go ahead and make my plumbing connections. But before I do that, I want to make sure I'm removing my plaster guards here and setting them off to the side for safekeeping, and I'll reinstall these after all my plumbing is completed. One thing I do want to point out on these plaster guards, may be kind of hard to see, but you'll notice there's a little bit of lines, one at the top and one at the bottom. It says finish wall must be between these lines. That acts as a good reference. So when you have those on and your other trades are coming together, where you're adding your cement board, your tile, whatever it may be, you can tell exactly where that finish wall needs to fall in between to make sure your trims fit correctly. Okay, with that said, I'm going to go ahead and make my plumbing connections now. All right, now that I've got my plumbing connections made, it's time to pressure test our system. Now before I do this, I want to make sure both my hot and my cold valve are in the off positions. It ships from the factory this way, but I think it's always a good idea to double check it just to make sure you don't have an issue on your hands when you go to do that test. So to do that, I'm going to use a pair of needle nose pliers, and on the hot side, I want to make sure the valve is turned all the way to the clockwise position, and on the cold side, it's the reverse, making sure the valve is turned all the way to the counterclockwise position. Okay. Now I've made sure those are both off, I can go ahead and pressure test my system. And when I do this, I'm going to be checking my 2 connection points down here at the bottom or the top, depending on how you installed it, checking to make sure I'm not seeing any drips or anything that needs to be corrected. Once that's done, I can go ahead and reinstall my plaster guards on both of my valves and my spout. And that will help protect the unit while the other trades finish the rest of the bathroom. And then the last thing we'll have to do is, before we install our final trim, is to flush the system just to make sure there's no debris in there that could cause a flow issue down the road. Once you're done with that, that wraps up the R3500-WL rough valve install. All right, I hope everything went well with that install, and if you have any additional questions, you can always reach out to Delta Faucet's customer service team. They're more than happy to help.